Hello, I'm Paula Bolton, co-founder of Lesbian Neighbour. Welcome to our Proud Lesbian series. During Pride Month, I will be interviewing a wide range of lesbians to gather lesbian perspectives and hear about lesbian lives in 2022. So for the second interview, I have possibly one of the younger lesbians that I'll be interviewing. Our first was 77. I have with me today 22-year-old Impolite Lesbian. So hello there.
Yeah.
Thank you for agreeing to share your perspectives with us. Perhaps you'd like to start by just talking to us about you as a lesbian.
Yeah, of course. So I came out for the first time around sort of 13 in school, 13, 14-ish, and dated a girl in school for a few years, and then we broke up a few months before I came out to my parents at 17. And I'm always slightly worried about telling people that, because it means that if they do ever see this, they will now know that I dated a girl for a few years that they know nothing about. It's not exactly top secret. And I left normal education at 16, so I went through going a slightly strange college path where there weren't many women, let alone lesbians, because of the nature of the college that I was in. But I found my way to Rape Crisis, which is a nice kind of friendly feminist lesbian space, not entirely lesbian, but like lesbian enough, and I've started to find some sort of friends and social connections, which is really exciting.
So can I ask you, was that an easy journey? How was it being a 13-year-old? What would that be, 7 or 8 years ago?
Yeah. I mean, being a 13-year-old girl is hard, let alone being a 13-year-old lesbian. I think I was less worried about my sexuality than my sex, and being a 13-year-old girl and everything that sort of comes with the expectations put on you and the way that you're being looked at and the standards that you're being sort of expected to meet. And I was a young carer. I was responsible for some family members, which puts a sort of heavy burden on any child. And so actually having a chance to even think about myself or my identity came a lot later. I realized that I was gay, immediately started dating a girl, and then that was kind of it. And I didn't think or speak about my sexuality until I was 19.
And was it a secret at school? Were you actually out at school? Did you get bullied? You know, I can't imagine so recently. You know, that is actually within the last decade, isn't it? And when I think back to how it was many years ago when folk came out, it was a very different thing.
I was out in school. I wasn't, because I was not always in school, I was doing these other things. I was not particularly well known in my year group, so not everyone knew that I was gay, but the people who knew me knew. There was only one friend who I ever chose to keep my sexuality secret from. Probably didn't do an incredibly good job, because I was openly dating another friend in front of her, but because she was quite conservative and Christian, and I didn't think she would approve. But other than her, pretty much everyone knew. And at my school, I would never have had a problem from the other children. I was more likely to have a problem from some of the teachers. But I didn't like my teachers that much anyway, so we didn't talk about sexuality with teachers for obvious reasons.
Were there many youngsters identifying as anything other than straight at the time? I mean, how common was it to be out and gay in your school?
I was definitely in a friendship group that would have been more LGBT than the rest of our year group. I was in a friendship group that was sort of a lot more focused around sort of art and English as favourite subjects and things like that, which does tend to draw a slightly different crowd. So by the time we reached the end of the school, my friendship group, almost all of us had come out as something. But outside of that, I don't think there were, I think everyone was quite easy about sexuality. I don't think it was something that a lot of us talked a lot about. You might find out that a boy in your year was dating another boy, but it didn't necessarily mean that he would come out to everyone as gay or bi. They were just dating until they weren't anymore.
Right, so fairly accepted. Yeah.
Amongst the students, yes.
Yes. And would you be able to say like out of a class, I don't know what class sizes there were in your school, but I know the schools I'm in at the moment tend to be around 30. So a proportion of, in a class of 30, when you were coming out, how many would be identifying as something other than straight?
Maybe 2 or 3 in any class. Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 in any one class.
Okay, and were the school making anything of that? Did you have any? I mean, I know now it literally at the moment it's a big issue, because obviously there's various groups that want to go into school. There's now the RSE curriculum, and there's a lot of debate about some of the resources that are being used. You know, some schools have had, for instance, they've had mermaids in, and you know, I mean, I know a form teacher who hadn't got a clue, but in her form lesson she had to go through the whole gender bread thing, and she hadn't got a clue what it was about, and the kids said, what's all this about? And she basically said, I don't know, and went on with the register, you know. But that's a fairly ordinary school here in a fairly small working class town. But that's happening now. Now, was that already happening back in whatever year that was, you know, just less than 10 years ago?
So I would have left secondary school around 2016, and we weren't taught about sexuality. I mean, at primary school level, I think we had done a little bit of, this is what gay means, and you know, someone in your year group has got 2 mums, please don't bully him. But I don't think we ever went any further into it than that. We did some external sexual education that was deliberately not done with our teachers to encourage students to feel safer, maybe asking for help if they were being hurt or anything like that. And that was really good sexual education. And they took you across things like forms of contraception, depending on who you and your partner were. And then I think in citizenship or religious education, one or the other, we will have learned about the ways that different religions might look on sexuality. That was about it. We weren't... Okay,
fairly light touch then, really.
Yeah.
But it was there. It wasn't like with the Section 28, nobody ever mentions it. It was there. I mean, it sounds actually, Caroline, really rather okay. I mean, because that is the intention with the RSE thing, would be that there is an acknowledgement of variety in the way people live and love. That's it. And it doesn't need to be any more specific than that. You know, certainly. So, well, I'm glad that you had such a positive start. And was that it sounds like, you know, if you were with somebody through that whole time, that's a lovely way to start off. I mean,
yeah. School was a really good experience in terms of sexuality. I think they handled just about everything else wrong at my school.
Yeah.
I think especially the way that they sort of supported students around mental health and everything else was not great. But in terms of sexuality, it just really wasn't, at least from my perspective, it wasn't a very big deal in school. I think the staff and most of the other students didn't think or talk too much about it. It wasn't something that I definitely think that when I was in school, the idea, we had a teacher who I was thinking of who was fairly homophobic and liked to make it known he was homophobic, but it was clear that he was overstepping. Other than with someone making inappropriate comments, I think the majority of teachers would not have considered it normal or appropriate to be talking to students in depth about their sexuality unless they were coming and asking for some form of crisis support.
Right. Okay. So was there, did you and your girlfriend at the time, did you seek support from anywhere else? Did you feel you needed it? Were you part of a group? You know, were there any youth groups in your town and that sort of thing?
So I'm in London, so there probably are great LGBT groups, but it was not sort of the biggest issue in either of our lives. I think we both will have seen some homophobia, but I don't think either of us have felt scared. I don't think either of us felt like we needed support. We probably needed community more than we had it. I don't think we had much community or any community that was older than us, which we probably would have been really quite grateful for. But I also think that we didn't know that we were missing that. I don't think that I could have known at 13 or 14 that things would have been better for me if I'd known older lesbians.
So when has that become clear to you?
Within the last year, upon meeting both lesbians who are a little bit older in age, but also just meeting lesbians my age, sort of, you know, even just a few years older than me, and meeting women who are married or women who are thinking about children or deciding that they're never going to have children, who are moving into different kind of houses and stuff like that and building their lives. I think it's only in the last year that I've really recognised that I've never actually had examples of what it looks like to be a lesbian throughout your entire life, not just when you're a teenager and dating, which is what's so sort of what I was aware of as a teenager, but also what is sort of so heavily featured on the kind of TV programs that I was seeing, to see an entire life and an adulthood that felt safe in your sexuality. I don't think I realised how much I was missing that until I started finding it.
Yeah, and I think I will mention, obviously I met you you know, at a conference where there were lots and lots and lots of women, and of course it was possible for us to see who the lesbians were because we had that wonderful Lesbian Spaces workshop. Now, how did that feel for you, being in that Lesbian Spaces workshop?
That was my first ever experience of being in a lesbian only space. That might have been my first experience of ever being in a female only space, other than sort of a hospital or something like that, of being in a room that was just women. There was something really incredible. I mean, that workshop, I talked in the workshop about how incredible it was. But I was also aware of there not being many women my age, and of what a big deal it was to actually speak to women about my experience as a young woman and listen to other women talk about their experiences at different ages. Yeah.
And then I also remember in a subsequent Zoom that we were in, that not only the age range that there was around that screen, because I remember then it went, I think you were possibly the youngest that day, and it went up to somebody that was approaching 80. Not only seeing, I think you referenced it as this is like my life being mapped out in front of me, seeing all those ages and stages, but also the international thing.
Yeah.
I mean, how has that been, knowing that there is this wider community that's accessible through the internet? You know, you've got a wide reach now, haven't you?
So I had been from a really young age in online circles that were very LGBT, but LGBT, not lesbian spaces. And the idea in some of those circles of wanting a specifically lesbian space was not really talked about. And it is, so I guess I'm trying to say, in a way, I have been in communities where I've found sort of similar experiences before, and maybe that's part of why I didn't know how different it would be and how incredible it would be to be in a room that was specifically marked as being lesbian and being about the experience of being a lesbian, and not having, oh, and just a few straight people and just a few people with completely different experiences who want to fit in because they also are friends with someone else. This is a lesbian room, and this is a space that is only for lesbians. It's quite an incredible thing in my life.
I think it's probably key to our mental health as a community, and I certainly in my own life can testify to the disappearance of lesbian spaces, and I'm glad to be part of the reawakening of that, or the resistance to the erasure of that. And you know, whatever initiatives it is that we're taking to reclaim some of that space for us purely as lesbians, it's great to hear that, you know, you had that experience. I often say of myself that actually put more like trilingual, but you know, at least bilingual, because most of the time we're speaking straight language. And it's not even really about words, because I don't think it's not like we use Polari or any ancient, you know, proper gay language, but we do have a different way of communicating just as lesbians. And the feel in the room when you don't have to dissemble, you don't have to hide what you really think, is like being fully yourself for once. Without having to make excuses or hide parts of yourself. So bringing your entire self to a thing is, I think, a very beneficial thing for our mental health. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think it is like talking about feminism in front of a man. It is really hard to explain the feeling in the conversation, even if he's not saying anything, or even if he's not doing anything that you're finding to be difficult. It's just a different conversation when you are having it in front of or with someone who doesn't understand the experiences that you're talking about. When you're speaking to someone who already knows, it's just different. Yeah. You don't have to explain things because they already know.
Yeah, that's true. So, you know, you mentioned that the space that you were inhabiting at the time was more of a queer space. At what point did that begin to feel odd to you? Did you start asking questions? Had you accepted that as the reality? Because obviously there's that, what we're told is that there is a complete generational split between the young queer people and us older folk that insist on maintaining our sexual boundaries as lesbians and gay men. So, you know, is that real? Are we imagining it?
So I think it is definitely a lot harder to have questions. I think it is a lot harder to talk about things like boundaries and sort of sexual, especially boundaries around sex, when you are young and in these spaces. I had and still have a lot of friends from those kind of spaces, and so I'm always quite careful to not have a conversation in which I go, it was all awful. Because actually, you know, I made friends that I will probably be friends with for the rest of my life. I made friends who were with me when things were really difficult in my personal life. I met a lot of women that I really care about and did care about. And there are some who I've lost touch with who I really cared about. But it doesn't mean that the environment and the space and the conversations that we were having were necessarily positive or good for all of us. It took me quite a while to realize some of the things that I kind of watched quietly without really saying anything were conversations like the sexual preferences debate, which has gone on for years and is still going on, which is, are you allowed to say that you completely believe that trans women are women, but you just don't want to date someone with a penis, or is that transphobic? Yeah. I watched that conversation going on for years and felt like asking questions, even asking questions, would be seen as very hostile. And I really remember another lesbian woman that I looked up to getting a lot of anonymous questions about that, and constantly being asked what she thought about that, and constantly being asked to share her opinion, and her repeatedly saying, stop asking me, I'm done with this conversation, I'm shutting it down. And then saying privately a couple of years later that she felt like she would have lost her community if she'd said the things she was really thinking. So I think that level of fear about saying something wrong, and that if you say something wrong, if you say one wrong thing once and then immediately apologize, you will still lose your social media, you will lose all of your friends, you will lose your entire access to the community. If you're not out to your parents, if you're not out in the rest of your life, that's it. That's your community. That is the space in which you can be gay, and you can just lose it for thinking the wrong thing for 2 minutes or asking the wrong question. And I think that fear is very real and very frightening, especially when you were young in those spaces.
So were there, you know, one of the things I have heard from other young women is that they begin by thinking that, you know, the L is part of the long and ever lengthening acronym, and so it's okay to be a lesbian. But actually, there is very little acceptance of lesbian or same-sex attracted, and that there is an immediate questioning of, are you sure you're lesbian? I mean, you're saying you're attracted to women. Does that mean you're a man? Maybe. Now, we used to have that as good old-fashioned homophobia. You know, why aren't you with a bloke? You know, would you know, have you been with a bloke? We used to get that all the time. This sounds like the same thing in a different outfit. Did you hear that going on at all in your groups?
I had slightly different versions of that. I'm too femme and too feminine presenting to be asked if I was actually a man. That's, no one has ever kind of questioned me about my gender because they see long hair and think woman. And especially during that time, I was wearing makeup a lot more. I was wearing dresses a lot more. I think that even in just the way that I present myself online, I don't think anyone would have questioned whether I was actually a trans man in the way that some of my friends got. But some of my friends got that, and I saw that. I think with me and with my experiences, it was more about trying to make sure that I understood that lesbian was not same-sex attracted, that is an old-fashioned definition that's gone away. And the last I was in these circles and the last I was keeping up with things, lesbian is non-men attracted to non-men. I hated it.
What does that even mean?
Well, that was part of what really pushed me out, because I am not a non-man. That's not what I call myself, actually. I'm a feminist, and being a feminist is really kind of central to a lot of my identity in politics. And feminism is not a non-man's movement.
Sorry.
It's a women's movement. I am a woman, and my attraction is to women, and I am allowed to speak about my attraction and use the word woman. And I felt really, really uncomfortable with that definition. And that definition that was supposed to be really inclusive did not feel like it included me. I'm not a non-man. That's not what I call myself. That's such a strange term that doesn't mean very much to people who aren't 15 and chronically online.
Ah, there's a thought now. Chronically online, that's a wonderful phrase. So is a lot, I mean, also at least 2 of the years that we're talking about in your past have been spent in lockdown, you know. Yeah. So I'm interested, was chronically online more, do you think, or less? Because I have heard various opinions as to whether or not the social contagion, which is an absolutely definite thing that's going on, was worse. Was it worse, or was it not as bad? Does the becoming part of a community and it being something that gives you your identity, to have that group of friends, if you're not physically meeting them, do you think it made it worse? Or I'm not very clear with that question, but
yeah, I understand what you mean.
You do, right? Good.
So I think I had struggled. I think because of being a carer, and I know I'd sort of go back to that, it's not what we're talking about, but it did mean that I had a very different experience from a lot of other young women my age, because of the way that being a carer had impacted on me. I wasn't in sort of normal education when I was 19 and lockdown started. So I didn't necessarily have an in-person friendship group of women my age that I got cut off from. I had college, which as I said, was a very male-dominated space, and it was not a very LGBT-friendly space. And I was, in some ways, a little bit grateful to not be walking into that building as often. But I definitely turned more, and I think most everyone my age definitely became online more. But I think I had already been in a group that was sort of chronically online. I think I was already in a group where I checked Twitter the first thing when I woke up in the morning before doing anything else, and the last thing when I went to bed at night. And I had very much sort of lived for Twitter since I was 13 to when I deleted it for 6 months or so when I was 19. I think I was very much in that category where we were online all the time and constantly trying to keep up with other time zones. So you would be online for most of the night as well, trying to keep up with everyone. And so for me in lockdown, starting to find the kind of feminism that I found now, I took a chance to get away from that for the first time. But I think it went the opposite for most other young women. I think most other young women who had more in their own lives suddenly didn't have that anymore. And then suddenly they were living the life that I had been living before, and they were online all the time.
Mm. So Twitter, obviously that was your main platform, but where does all this other world live? You know, the TikTok, Reddit, what are the platforms where it's all happening? I know it's platforms that a lot of us older women aren't on. That I do know.
It all started on Tumblr. Everything started on Tumblr. Everything, I think even most people who loved and still love Tumblr would agree that a lot of what is bad in the world in amongst young people, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, the things that you disagree with on the other side of the political spectrum started or got worse on Tumblr. I was never on Tumblr. I got enough warning from other women that I didn't actually sort of go to Tumblr myself, but I was aware of how radical Tumblr was and how much people were fighting constantly about everything, and how Tumblr essentially brought that feeling and that experience of cyberbullying, the kind that you kind of really connect to, where you are being individually targeted and you have done something wrong and people don't like you. They brought that to everyone, because it was so easy to leave anonymous questions, and it was so easy to pile in on someone. People would do it to people they didn't know just because everyone else was doing it. And so they brought that feeling of you are being personally watched and you are being targeted and no one likes you and no one cares about you to everyone simultaneously. And that's devastating for everyone, but especially for teenage girls, when sort of the urge to be liked is so strong.
Yeah,
I think Tumblr has faded in popularity quite a bit, or possibly I've just grown out of it. It's possibly still as popular among 13-year-olds and I'm just not talking to 13-year-olds. But I was aware that there were a couple of years where it felt like most people were coming from Tumblr to Twitter, and Twitter was and is very, very big. Most of this I think can still be found on Twitter, and Twitter, the ability to put out 100 thoughts a minute I think is going to be the sort of platform for this for a long time to come. But definitely it's moving over to TikTok as well. TikTok is, I love TikTok, and a lot of the women that I'm friends with don't like it when I say that, because they either think that TikTok is just for young people, or they're worried about the politics on TikTok. But you can find almost every kind of almost everywhere on the political spectrum on TikTok. And I think the music and the art and the way that it has a breaking down content is quite addictive and quite hard to get away from once you got onto it.
Right. So a lot of this is online, isn't it? When you were saying that, I wonder if the cancel culture and the way of you talked about how the bullying was a very real thing on Tumblr. Is that the same sort of thing that you're seeing in the thought policing that is going on in wider society now? As soon as you say the wrong thing, you're cancelled. Is it that same thing?
So I think the interesting thing about cancel culture, when you see people talk about cancel culture, they often talk about, Julie Bindel being deplatformed or similar things. There are so many American names you could mention of people being cancelled, deplatformed. I think that is less, and I have always been quite struck by Kathleen Stock saying that she wasn't cancelled, and saying that she refuses to believe that she's been cancelled because she is still writing and she is still creating content, she's still doing new things. That's not what being cancelled is. Being deplatformed and shut down when you are already someone who is listened to and respected, that's one thing. I think it's a lot more worrying when it is amongst young women and you can get shut down and you can lose everything and you can lose your platform and your voice because you get mass reported for saying something wrong. And the story that sticks with me, the experience that sticks with me, is being added to a group chat that was about trying to use the word lesbian, and it was created for and by a young lesbian woman who wanted to use the word lesbian instead of calling herself gay all the time, because she felt uncomfortable with the word lesbian. She wanted to know why and just wanted some support. And she made a group chat with a bunch of us who all used the word lesbian. And we were in it for maybe 4 hours and it was great. And then all of us who were in the UK all went to bed. And overnight, some 13-year-old in America said that she could never see herself sleeping with someone who had a penis. And I woke up in the morning and the group chat was had dead. Loads of people had left it. They had been fighting for hours. This 13-year-old had been told to kill herself. She'd been told she was an awful person. And by the time I woke up in the morning, she had deleted her Twitter account because it took 8 hours for a young teenager who was in a space that she felt safe in to question whether she ever wanted to have sex with someone who had certain anatomy, to just completely lose all access to the support that she had built for herself. And that to me is what being cancelled is, far more than platforming a high profile woman who's already being listened to and respected.
Yeah, I agree actually. That I saw something today about another teacher somewhere who's being targeted. You know, it's happening to ordinary people everywhere. So I just wanted to ask, you know, looking for support. We've talked about how it works online, but this week the LGB Alliance have been granted an award to scope out the setting up of a helpline specifically for LGB youth. Obviously they're immediately being targeted, but I'm not bothered about that. What I'm bothered about is this a good idea? Is it going to work? Because we were going to do a lesbian one. You know, in the olden days we had the lesbian line and you could always be on the end of a phone, which is a really different thing to the online thing. How do you think that would work nowadays? Is that something that's worth pursuing?
I think the idea is great. I think the helpline will be fantastic. If I am very honest, and I've slightly put off saying this in feminist spaces because I know how many of the women that I like really like the group, I am not the biggest fan of the LGBT Alliance. I'm not the biggest fan of some of the things they've said, but I think you can disagree with someone and still respect their work.
Yes.
You know, I don't agree with everything, and I was just having a conversation about I don't agree with everything that the organisation that I work at does. I don't agree with every individual policy we have, but I think that overwhelmingly it's an incredible place. I think the same is probably true with LGBT Alliance. I don't agree with everything, especially what they put out on their social media, and because I've not done a lot to interact further with them, I, like most people, have seen the profile they put out, and I think LGBT Alliance are trying very hard to sort of stand and be brave and be challenging, which is admirable. And I do wonder if that sometimes runs a risk of turning into being controversial for the sake of being the only person who stands up and disagrees. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm not being fair. It's a conversation I would be very interested to have with anyone who works there, because I'd be very interested in what it's like from the inside. So if I had been choosing to give this money to someone to start an LGB helpline, that's probably not the group I would have given it to. But I think the helpline is fantastic. I think more crisis resources are always going to be fantastic. I think that anyone who is willing to do the training, anyone who's willing to do the support, to get the volunteers, to put all these things in place is brilliant. And I hope to see a lot more of them now that they are having this money to actually do. I think that a part of my problem with them is what they get accused of, which is that up until now, they've been doing more speaking than doing. Now they have the funding to do something. And that will change how they function as a group. I might look on them a lot more positively in a year because they will have been doing more action than speaking by that point. And I think that will fundamentally change them as a charity.
Yeah, I mean, what would be really good going forward is I would like to facilitate a conversation between you and the Alliance. So I will put you in touch with somebody so you can have your questions answered and, you know, learn what's been going on behind the scenes, which a lot of it has been survival. Yeah. Because the minute that, I mean, I was at the founding meeting, and what on earth can be controversial about saying, fine, get on with it, Stonewall, you've obviously got your focus now, but there are actually lesbian, gays and bisexuals who need a group that focuses on them. And it's just like us at Lesbian Labour. We know that there is LGBT Labour. Great, get on with it. We want to focus on the lesbians. And
yeah.
We are protected characteristic. We are sexual orientation. Therefore, we have sexual orientation as our protected characteristic. We should be able to organise autonomously. We are not doing it to exclude deliberately anybody else. We are focusing on the existence of lesbians, or with the alliance, lesbians, gays and bisexuals. So it's that very controversial thing in this world. But you know, we're waiting to hear from the EHRC about our actual legal right as lesbians to organise autonomously, and I'll be, you know, reporting on that. So I wanted to ask you a little bit. I mean, we've strayed into politics and activism, really, I suppose, in a way. I just wondered, what are your thoughts about Pride? Is this something you've been to, would like to go to? How is it regarded in the community that you were part of and in your current community?
I've been to one Pride parade, and I would have been maybe 16, and I wasn't out at home, and I went on my own. And it wasn't a great idea, because just in general, being a nervous, oh no, I think I have been to one since then, but also on my own, but still as a teenager, and in general, being a nervous teenager on your own in a big crowd full of strangers, most of whom have at least a couple of other people with them, it's just hard. It just is hard. It didn't feel much like community to just be a kid on your own, especially in large groups. Of a lot of the areas that I ended up in were a lot more male than female, and it wasn't quite the kind of community I was looking for. And I do always slightly think of Hannah Gadsby talking about, they're very loud, aren't they? You know, it's very high profile. Where are the quiet gays? I do wonder about that a little bit. I would be slightly more open probably to going and watching a little bit of the parade, and then going back to hang out at some people's house, or doing something a little bit sort of quieter to celebrate Pride. I like the idea of Pride. I think that when you are not straight, you are taught that your sexuality makes you less than other people. And I think you were taught to feel bad about yourself. And I think having a specific event and a specific time in which you say, I'm really proud of who I am and I'm proud of everything I've overcome, is a great concept. I think it doesn't work if you're on your own.
Yeah, that's I can imagine that was quite an isolating experience, whereas it should have felt that you were part of something. Okay, one other question then. The ever-changing acronym, the LGBT plus. What's your sense of how that comes into being? Who's in charge of it? How do we challenge it if we think it should be changed? Who do I write to if I want to add something on the end? You know, have you got any thoughts on that, Caroline? Because I'm lost. All I know is that it's getting longer and longer, and I have no sense of connection with the things towards the, well, anything beyond the B, LGB, anything beyond that is not sexual orientation. So I'm confused.
So I am largely used to LGBT. That's what was more common when I was young and kind of coming into these spaces, and then LGBTQIA. But that was never, even in my not very sort of questioning space, there were other lesbians saying, well, hold on, you know, does this all make sense as a continuum? What if you already have LGBT plus, does it make sense to continue listing every other possibility? And also having some people say, well, hold on, I'm in sex and I don't consider myself to be gay. Why am I being tagged onto this? And I think that was quite hard. I just did training where we were read out LGBTQQIP2SAA. And I think I think that's interesting. I don't see how that is. And just even I mean, I pulled up the sort of picture of the acronym that we were given, but even then, looking at some things that are on there, two-spirit as an identity that people can opt into, that's, you know, there's a couple of things where being told that you are androgynous makes you gay, where you're being told that you can identify as two-spirit now, which feels incredibly offensive to, you know, people who have a cultural connection to certain language that random white teenagers on Tumblr are now co-opting. I think that just tagging on anything that you want to and making it more and more, making those labels more and more specific is not actually supportive to the people within that community. Is anyone who's androgynous now LGBT? Is any woman who is not wearing a dress LGBT by virtue of looking androgynous or dressing androgynous? I have issues with that.
So was that training at your rape crisis work that you do?
Yeah.
And was the provider a queer provider or a feminist provider?
I am not sure. So I think she works in sexual violence. I think that's why she came to rape crisis, I think. But I don't know. I don't believe she actually said anything about her own sexuality. I found that training, well, I'll say the same to you that I kind of said during and after the training, which was I spoke a little bit about how difficult it can be for young women to use the word lesbian, and I was told that's why we should call everyone queer, because because lesbian is an often sexualized word, and apparently instead of challenging that, it makes more sense to refer to those people as queer, which I actually don't like. When I'm speaking about my sexuality, to be told, it's like being told, actually we're just not going to call you Caroline because it's a bit of a complicated name and people don't like that, we're going to find something else for you instead. That's my identity, and you actually don't get to tell me that you're going to redefine it to something that makes more sense to you. I think that everyone has an absolute right to use, I believe that everyone has a right to use the language that makes most sense to them. I don't have an issue with anyone else calling themselves queer. I don't have an issue with anyone else calling themselves non-binary or anything else. But equally, I then am not going to sit there and be told that actually I'm probably queer, or actually I'm something else, because I also have a right to define my own sexuality and to label my own sexuality and to not be challenged by that in a workplace.
Yes, well, I mean, this is in your workplace, so are you have to use pronouns workplace as well?
Not at the moment.
Okay, that'll be interesting. I mean, I would have thought, you know, one area that you would think there was a real understanding of the importance of accurate language around sex, sexuality, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender reassignment, all these things being different and specific, would be rape crisis, where the trauma is committed based on biology. You know, it bewilders me that it can be in any way affected. But then most of the, you know, the training organizations that are out there doing the diversity and inclusion, the majority of them are in fact you know, of the Stonewall mold, let me put it that way.
I think there is a big difference between the way that a charity at the moment has to present themselves to continue functioning in the world at the moment, and the way that a charity has to work to continue functioning in the world at the moment, and the beliefs of the women within that charity. I don't believe that there are any women at rape crisis who don't know what sex is. I don't believe there are women at rape crisis who don't know what a woman is, or don't understand why women, or why women are more likely to experience things like sexual violence. I don't think there is a single woman in that training who is unclear on what a lesbian is. It's more about why we are having that training. I don't disagree with us having LGBT training, because I do also think that whatever anyone's personal beliefs are, we need to be able to meet the needs of all of our callers. And I think we should be trained to understand different
What
people's
that
beliefs,
means,
different people's sex and sexuality and how they are living. But I think that training and the fact that it was not specifically around sort of callers and the way that people might identify, and a lot more of it was around things like using the word queer and why the word queer is so fantastic, and there was less space for conversation or criticism or us contributing anything about our own identities. I think there is a huge, well, yeah, what I've already said, I think there is a huge difference between what the women in Rape Crisis believe and what Rape Crisis is an organisation, how they choose to present themselves. And for everything I'm saying here, I can't say anything critical about Rape Crisis without also saying that it is an incredible organisation that I feel completely honoured to be a part of. For any criticism I have, there is no one else doing the work the Rape Crisis does.
Yeah, and I do understand that act of translation, because I mean I founded and ran a women's centre for over 20 years, and at one point we realised that we were the only one in the country. At a conference we went to, there were 80 odd women's centres there. We were the only ones that were still voluntary, and I set about trying to get us a grant, and we ended up with a £750,000 grant from the lottery. And in order to get it, I had to translate it into what I call, you know, the bureaucratization of the voluntary sector. Basically, I had to speak their speak in order to get what we wanted to do, grassroots, women-centered, through. And then I had to report back by translating what we were doing into the right reporting speak. So I think it's probably, you know, the next iteration of that actually that's going on. But just, I am fascinated. What are all those letters again that you had, and what do they stand for? How far have we actually got?
So LGBTQQIP2SAA. So that's
right. So go from the T. What do they all stand for now then?
Queer, questioning, intersex. Although I'd always wonder about that. If you're questioning, surely you're questioning whether you are one of the others, which means you would still have a sexuality. Questioning is not in and of itself a sexuality. Intersex, pansexual, two-spirit, androgynous, and asexual. And then underneath was just written MSM and non-binary, which is men who have sex with men, and non-binary. I'm not sure why that was included but not part of the acronym.
Aren't men who have sex with men gay men? Am I missing something? Or bisexual men?
I think within the context of talking about sexual violence, there was an interesting conversation about shame, especially amongst men, and about how to work with men who have had sex or experienced sexual violence and don't have a label for their identity or don't call themselves gay.
Okay.
So I think I can see that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Being an important part of the conversation. I don't see that as a sexuality.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because throughout, where I would use the term sexual orientation, you've been using the word sexuality, which interests me because, you know, another part of my history, particularly at the Women's Centre, was about developing a positive sexuality, as in we all have a sexuality, not a sexual identity or orientation. So I'm always, I listened to the Westminster Hall debate yesterday about, you know, whether or not transgender should be included in the conversion therapy ban. And the words were indescribable, the way the words were all, and nobody's using the same terms. And we do need to get the terminology right in order to know what we're talking about, actually. So
that's why I do think that training and conversations like that are important, even from providers that I don't necessarily politically align with or always agree with, because I think that at least getting on the same page about understanding what we need with this language is really important before we try to have any conversation, especially creating law or policy around any of this, that you need to at least understand what the person you're talking to is saying.
Yes. Now, I would like to say it's wonderful hearing such a positive young woman being involved, especially in Rape Crisis, because, you know, that it needs to be, this is your world that you're going to have to take forward. I just wonder, just to finish, what was it that made you start questioning the queer space and find your way to a feminist space? That journey fascinates me. How did you get there?
I have said this a couple of times. When I was young, my mum used to say to me and my sister that we don't do girl power in this house, we do feminism. And I didn't really understand what that meant when she said that to me when I was 11 and listening to not One Direction, Little Mix. When I was listening to girl power groups, I didn't actually kind of understand what that term meant. It felt like a criticism. But when I was sort of 19 and I started at Rape Crisis at 19, and then we went into lockdown during my training. At that point and moving forward, I started looking at the spaces that I was in, and especially learning about sexual violence, and then going onto Twitter and seeing all these conversations about whether you're allowed to say no for one reason or another reason, whether you're allowed to not want to date someone and to say that you don't want to date them. That doesn't feel like a feminist space. And if you are not allowing women to have boundaries, or you are policing them on how they're allowed to speak about their boundaries, that's not a feminist space. And so I started looking for the feminist spaces. And that's how I found my way to Philia, to you, to conversations around the word lesbian and around what feminism actually looks like. Really, it is about kind of the difference between girl power and we feel good because, which is not, there is a time and a place for girl power, and there's a time and a place for just empowering girls without them needing to learn about the violence and misogyny in the world. But I think I had a quite deep understanding that I gotten from my mother and my grandmother about what feminism should feel like. And I think I started to come to the realization that actually when I look at what I'm getting from Rape Crisis and what I'm getting from the rest of my life, this is what feminism feels like, this isn't. So how do I find feminism for the rest of my life?
Well, I think you're going to be part of shaping feminism for the rest of your life. And I'm really glad, because it's, you know, there's this thing about handing on the baton and handing on the mantle. And with you at the helm, Caroline, I think we'll go far. So we've ended up calling you Caroline.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
But never mind. There we go. Impolite Lesbian. Was there anything else you just wanted to, that's a good place to finish for me, but was there anything else you wanted to mention?
No, I think I'm happy to end the conversation there as well. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And it's great to, I know that this will be a rare recording. I hope if you do know any other younger women that would like to share their experiences, and I have to say across the board, because you know, lesbian Labour, we are intent on maintaining the definition of lesbian as same-sex attracted adult human female. However, that doesn't mean we don't speak to everybody, because we do, and we try to. And if it wasn't for the fact that there is this automatic deletion, if that's what you say, we would be having a much broader conversation. And I'm beginning to feel a shift. There are some who will say, all right, well, what is it that you really want then? And you know, I'm going to be interviewing others who are completely on the opposite side of the political divide as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for
Bye.
organizing.